Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today, we're looking at players on the waiver wire in Week 12 that you should avoid adding this week. Let your league mates add, let them waste their fab, their priority. But I will close things out with a few players that you guys should look to actually add this week. I know you guys enjoyed this style of video last season, so wanted to bring it back, but didn't want to bring it back until I genuinely felt like there's players that you should be avoiding this week on the waiver wire. I've got 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a tight end. Guys, if you enjoy this video, would really appreciate if you did let me know that by hitting that like button. And if you are new, hit that subscribe button. We've got fantasy football content coming to you every day to help you win your fantasy championships. Let's get into these players. First up, probably for a lot of people, the number 1 ad on the week is Zach Charbonnet. He's currently 44% rostered, so right close to that threshold for us when we talk about below 50%. So for some of you guys, he might not even be available. But we saw Charbonnet thrust into the starting role with Kenneth Walker suffering an oblique injury early in their game against the Rams. Now, we don't know the timeline for Kenneth Walker, but from what Pete Carroll said, it is something serious that I don't think we're going to see him. Pretty well positive we're not going to see him on Thursday for their Thanksgiving matchup with the Niners. So I think there's a decent chance he misses multiple weeks here. So for a lot of people, they're like, wow, an RB1 on a team that isn't too bad. That brings me a lot of excitement. I really am going to spend my fab to add him. Now, Charbonnet with the opportunity wasn't too good on the ground, wasn't very efficient, but did save the week by putting up 6 receptions for about 22 yards. So he has that receiving profile. That is one thing that I do like about him. But the reason not to add him is these matchups. And when you're playing fantasy football, especially this late into the season when you have all this data and information on these teams, matchups are king. That's how you decide what to do with your players, who to start, who to sit. And at this stage in the season, when we're all the way in Week 12, only a few weeks left in your fantasy football regular season, that's how you should be deciding who you add off the wire. And for Charbonnet, the matchups are a nightmare. They get San Francisco this week, who is 5th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. They get Dallas the following week, 9th. They get San Francisco again, and then they close this 4-week stretch out with the Philadelphia Eagles, who are the number 1 defense in fantasy points allowed to running back. So honestly, even with Charbonnet getting this opportunity as the RB1, these are matchups that I'd probably be sitting him in because guess what? This team's going to be an underdog. They're going to be running against all 4 of these teams, or these defenses that their biggest strength is their run defense. Maybe for Dallas, it might be a little bit better against the pass, but even so, the offense, I think, struggles in all 4 of these games. So the ceiling in these matchups, in my opinion, is non-existent. It's really low. And then you look at the floor, which isn't too bad. Like Charbonnet will not completely kill you because of his receiving profile, but I do not think that this is a guy that is of the talent level that he'll be thrust into the RB1 role and be able to take massive advantage of it, especially in these matchups. I'm looking at guys like, we saw it with Tony Pollard, with Alexander Madison. We saw Joshua Kelly when Eckler went down, thrust into the RB1 role, and he was even worse than he was as the RB2. I'm not a huge believer in Charbonnet's talent. I know some of the numbers will be, wow, look at the carries of 10 plus yards, the missed tackles forced. I don't think he's that type of transcendent talent or a better talent on the ground than Kenneth Walker is. So I wouldn't expect him to be better. And these matchups are just brutal. So I know it's very tempting to add a guy who's going to get this type of opportunity, but you're just never going to be happy playing him until I think he gets Pittsburgh in maybe the last week of the fantasy season. So he can be someone that if you start him, keeps you from making the fantasy playoffs. So I am not looking to add him. Our second and final running back is Roshan Johnson. He is 20% rostered right now. He's a player that I've been dabbling with throughout the season of bouncing between adding him off the wire and dropping him. Now, the opportunity arose this week with Khalil Herbert did return. Make his first start in 6 weeks now, and he was pretty ineffective with his opportunity. 16 rushes for just 35 yards, and then Deonta Foreman, who had an ankle injury coming into this game, ended up leaving the game with the same ankle injury and did not return. So Roshan got some opportunities. Honestly, looked pretty good. Six carries for 30 yards was the most efficient back on the team by a pretty good margin. And as well, he's a great pass blocker, much better than Khalil Herbert, so that helps him get on the field in passing downs as well. Now, some of you guys might want a piece of him because, hey, this is one of the highest volume rushing offenses in the league. They're running the ball at a top 5 rate this season. But there's a few reasons why I'm not really considering adding him in any which way. And the first is, much like with Charbonnet, for running backs, schedule is everything. And the schedule here for the Bears backs is really tough. Minnesota is 6th in the league in fantasy points allowed to running backs. It might end up being even better after their performance on Sunday night. They get their bye week, so that's another week you can't use Roshan Johnson. Detroit, who is 7th, and Cleveland, who is 8th. Do these sound like teams, especially with Minnesota and Detroit right now, well, mostly Detroit, even Cleveland, honestly. These don't sound like games that the Bears are going to be winning either. So I don't see enough positive game scripts for rushing touchdowns to be happening for Johnson. And even if he is going to get those opportunities, because there's a chance that Foreman's injury isn't too serious. And I think, honestly, from the biggest point for me is just very highly unlikely that Johnson becomes the true RB1 in this offense, and we see Herbert and we see Foreman take a significant back seat. So for me, Johnson is just completely a waste and someone I wouldn't even consider starting in any of the next 4 weeks. So for that reason, there's no reason to add him. Now let's get to some trendy wide receivers. First is Khalil Shakur. He's currently 11% rostered. I think a lot of you guys probably know this, but for anyone that just kind of looks at the box score, sees a big performance and wants to add someone off the wire, I think it's good to talk about the context. For Shakur, he had 4 targets, 3 receptions, 115 yards and a touchdown against the Jets defense. But the efficiency and what he's done in the last 4 weeks since Dawson Knox has gone down just isn't sustainable. He's had 16 targets, 14 receptions, and turned that into 288 yards. He's made some explosive plays, but he's done this off of just a 14% target rate in terms of his routes run and just a 11.7% target share. These are not percentages or shares of the offense that are going to tell me that Khalil Shakur is going to break out and continue to sustain what he's doing right now. And the target competition is just too stiff. We're looking at guys like Stephon Diggs. Dalton Kincaid has actually had more targets than Stephon Diggs the last 4 weeks. So these two guys have been monsters for this team, especially in those important areas of the field, in the red zone, touchdown opportunities. And with Shakur as well, he's not getting a lot of those downfield looks in terms of easier explosive plays. His average depth of target is 10 yards, is 77th, tied with Keenan Allen and actually just behind Chris Godwin. So we're not seeing as many opportunities for him to generate those explosive plays, but he has done that. And it's because of his yards after contact. And if you're looking, or yards after the catch, sorry. And if you're looking for players to add, I'm looking for someone who's building on their target share or they're like a great red zone option. Shakur is neither. He's doing a lot with a little, and that is something that's very difficult to sustain, even in an offense as good as the Bills is. Now we head over to this Cardinals offense, which is a bit of a mess right now, but I want to talk about Rondale Moore, who's 15% rostered. This is an offense with Kyler Murray that looks much, much better than it did with Joshua Dobbs, but for Moore, I wanted to dig into some of the numbers when it comes to Rondale Moore and Kyler Murray playing together. Moore is averaging just 7.1 half PPR fantasy points per game with Murray at quarterback. On the season, that would rank him as the wide receiver 58. That's not something to be excited about. That's not something worth adding. And as well, we saw him hit that big explosive play, the only catch he had of the game on just 2 targets. But over the course of his 3 seasons in the NFL, his career high in receptions of 20-plus air yards is 2. He does not generate explosive plays or get downfield opportunities. And as well, he has, amongst the wide receivers with at least 20 targets this season, he has an average depth of target of just 5.8 yards. That is 101st of 105 qualified wide receivers. So we're looking at someone who, in my mind, doesn't get deep shot opportunities. They look to get him the ball in short areas, a lot of screen passes. They'll even try to give him a couple of rushing opportunities in a game. And he's got to do the work in terms of generating yards after the catch. And that's fine if your target share is there. And it's not for Moore. He's got a 13.3% target share this season. It's really not different with Kyler Murray at quarterback. We see a couple games with lightning in a bottle in terms of had 9 targets 2 weeks ago and then found the end zone this past week. But we also saw Greg Dortch get onto the field with Michael Wilson absent. And Dortch, in his short time at the Cardinals, dating back to last season, was able to get pretty significantly involved and even get onto kind of our radar in terms of the waiver wire as a potential player to add and play. He had some pretty solid matchups. That was with Murray at QB. Now he had a big game here. He had 7 targets, which led their receivers. And Dortch is someone who will run a decent amount of his routes from the slot. Could he eat into Moore's opportunities when Michael Wilson is back? And then as well, we have Trey McBride, who runs the majority of his routes from the slot as well. So there's a lot of competition. It's a bit of a mess here. I'm surprised that Marquise Brown hasn't emerged. He's been the one getting a lot of downfield looks that he has not hit on. So I would be more confident in a guy like him being successful than I would with someone like Rondale Moore. The volume isn't there. He's done great for 2 weeks. Do not get lost in that. He is someone I'm not looking to add. All right, I'm excited to talk about this one because this is probably behind Charbonnet in the leagues that are a little bit deeper. This is the most enticing ad of the week, and I'm excited to share some of this information on Isaiah Likely, who is currently 3% rostered right now. Everybody is going to look at Likely's performance last season in the 2 games without Mark Andrews. And they're going to tell you this is the reason why you have to add Isaiah Likely. And it's just not the case. Week 9 of last season, he had 5 targets, 1 reception for 24 yards and a touchdown. So save that week with a touchdown. In week 18 last season with Tyler Huntley at quarterback, 12 targets, 8 receptions, and 103 yards. That'll get the job done. No doubt about it. But again, only the game in week 9 was with Lamar Jackson. He only recorded 1 reception. What this was about last season is opportunity in a horrendous offense. Do you know, this is some great trivia for you. Do you know the wide receivers for the Ravens during these 2 games? I will tell you, the wide receiver 2, Devin Duvernay. The wide receiver 3, Demarcus Robinson. You want to talk about week 18? It was Demarcus Robinson and Sammy Watkins. There was no talent. There was no competition for targets. This was a horrible passing offense that ultimately leaned on a guy that they thought was perhaps the most talented of the bunch, which is not saying a lot. But now we look at this season for Lamar. This is the best group of pass catchers he's had in his entire career. So Likely has real target competition to deal with when we talk about Zay Flowers, when we talk about Odell Beckham Jr., when we talk about Rashad Bateman. Isaiah Likely is not emerging as a startable tight end. I don't care about the matchup. He's not emerging as a startable tight end with this type of target competition and Lamar Jackson at quarterback. If you add Isaiah Likely, you're wasting your fab, you're wasting your priority because it's absolutely not worth it. Okay, now that we finished that rant, there are players this week that I do think are worthy of adding. Odell Beckham Jr. is definitely my number 1 add on the week. When you look at what he was able to do when he was on the field last week, received a significant amount of targets, despite the fact he probably could have ran a few more routes. So I love him. I think he is the guy that replaces Mark Andrews when it comes to that share of the offense. So very excited about his opportunity, especially with the Chargers on deck. Rashad Bateman is worth a speculative add too. Again, with the target share bumping down to these other options, and Bateman has started to look a lot better over the last couple of weeks. Another injury that we have to talk about, the Saints. You look at Rashid Shaheed, you look at his opportunity now with Michael Thomas out. Shaheed did not run more routes because of Thomas's absence, but when you look at Carr, he's throwing the ball downfield at the highest rate in the entire league. Shaheed is that guy for this team in terms of those downfield opportunities. He's been incredible with them. And then A.T. Perry was the guy who stepped onto the field, took over for Thomas, and looked very good. This is a player who's very capable, coming out of Wake Forest. He played with Sam Hartman at Wake Forest and was super, super productive over there and did demand a great target share. So he's worth an add in your deeper leagues, something to kind of monitor and see what happens. Definitely not someone to start right now, but there's some upside because Thomas's absence is long-term. And then 2 others, Tutu Atwell. The Cardinals are on deck for the Rams. If Cooper Kupp is out, we saw what Atwell was able to do in the weeks prior to Kupp's return. So he is worth an add for you this week because of a great matchup, because the Cardinals have a better offensive pulse with Kyler Murray, so we should see the Rams have to utilize their offense a little bit more and their pass game a little bit more. The last one, another bit of a speculative add, someone you can add for cheap. Maybe in some of your leagues, they're going to be looking at him because he scored. But Jameson Williams, the route participation picked up quite a bit. He ran 25 routes last week in a game where the Lions were desperate to find points. Williams is that answer. He's an explosive big play threat that is definitely a risky guy to be able to plug into your lineup and play. But if we see a couple more weeks of his involvement ticking up, it could be really exciting because I think he's a very talented player. So those are some players, despite all the guys I don't want you to add, that you could add this week. And again, if you guys have questions about any of these players or players that I didn't mention that you want to hear about, drop those down below in the comment section. I'm happy to answer as many as I can. Guys, if you enjoyed today's video, would really appreciate it if you did hit that like button for me, subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.